that 90 lives have been taken away on the last Sabbath day of 1879, which will be remembered for a very long time.
This is William McGonagall, poet and tragedian. Apparently he was very popular in the taverns of Edinburgh in the late 19th century. He lodged at number 12 Grove Street. An unusual sight. Anglophiles celebrating the coronation of the Queen in Bramfield Street in 1953. The name Bramfield comes from the landowner Alexander Brand. These were literally Brand's fields. The Grove mansion which stood here was variously occupied by Baron Kennedy, the Countess of Murray, and Lord Colville, who fought at Culloden. He died here in 1775. Fountain Bridge was once home to the top of the aristocracy. Now we're looking towards Dundee Street. A row of tenements with shops underneath were demolished to make way for the brewery's plans in the late 1970s. In fact, I was the last resident to be removed from number 170. At number 176, Scotland's greatest son was born and bred. No need to explain about him, we all know. Scotland is obviously in his heart and he does his best. Here's the brewery clock, now gone. Behind the clock is the original well of McKeens Brewery. It was polluted years ago. Now we're in the brewery. Notice the number of coopers that the brewery needed in 1920. There were thousands of coopers employed throughout Edinburgh before the introduction of metal casks in the 1960s. Here are the girls of the bottling hall at the same period, another source of employment for local ladies. This is Mr. William Mackay with the last brewery horse. Of course, horses, like men, are expendable. The original William McEwen, who set up business here in the 1850s, was a trained brewer and an astute businessman. But most importantly, he had wealthy family connections, notably the Youngers, which enabled them to grow and expand ever larger. Having closed Fountain Brewery down, therefore losing the jobs for future generations, Scottish and Newcastle have proven that they hold their Edinburgh employees and customers in contempt. They now brew their beer in Manchester. Destroyed the brewing trade in Edinburgh, once the home of beer. Don't drink it, it's crap. Here we are, looking up Gilmore Park, what we used to know as the Mill Lane. The rubber mill had a shop just to the left, where we as bairns would buy our footwear. Black canvas with a rubber sole. They cost 1 and 9pence, and will usually last about a month. We wore them summer and winter. This is the rubber mill just after closure in the 1960s. The main mill was on the left-hand side. On the other side was the vulcanite works and the maintenance department. Here's a centenary brochure published by the mill, which advertised the goods they made. Golf balls, tyres, hoses, Wellingtons, etc. The rubber mill was founded in 1856 by an American, Henry Lee Norris. He brought over 4 skilled workers to train the local people in the production of rubber goods. The proximity of the canal was fundamental, as it was needed to transport the raw materials required. During both World Wars, the rubber mill worked flat out to provide equipment for the military. Here's a man producing inner tubes. It was a dirty job. Everything was covered in talcum to prevent the rubber sticking. This gave the employees a peculiar pallor, which you could recognise immediately in the street. This is a photograph of the maintenance department of the mill. They were required to keep the wheels turning. The North British rubber mill was taken over by a multinational company in the 1960s and moved out to Newbridge. taking some of the staff. Progress again, which brought an end to over 100 years of rubber making in Fountain Bridge. The horn has gone, and the workers are heading home. The mill laid on buses to take workers to work in the morning and home again at night, all over the town and beyond. Here we're at the lifting bridge at Gilmore Park, crossing the canal. This is the same bridge we saw crossing Fountain Bridge previously. The vast sums of money spent in the resurrection of the Union Canal appears to have borne fruit. At least the swans have returned, a sign of new life, hopefully. Soon the sight of houseboats will be common again. This is what the iron bridge replaced, an old footbridge, the mill in the background. The new development at the Lochran Basin, to cater for the trade of the future, tourists. The building of the canal was fundamental to the development of Fountain Bridge of old. Hopefully, the new work will breathe new life into the old street again. Here we are looking to the Lochran Basin. Gilmore's rope walk was on the right-hand bank. There used to be boatyards on the banks as well. In the heyday of the canal, in the 1830s and 40s, there would have been around 200 barges plying between here and Falkirk. A lot of people depended upon the canal for their employment. Now we have the west view from the bridge. Imagine what it was like 150 years ago, with hundreds of barges and horses passing up and down. I can remember when the water was clean enough for perch and roach. Now there's only pike.
Have you swattered through the summer till the salt sweat seared your eyes? Have you dragged through plumb dead levels in the slush that reached your thighs? For these are the songs of a navvy, bearing the taint of the brute. Unasked, uncouth, unworthy, out of the world I put. Stamped with a brand of labour, the heel of a navvy's boot.
Typical navvies. Most of them are Irishmen or Highlanders. Between 1818 and 1822, they managed to cut the canal, build the bridges and aqueducts all the way to Falkirk for £250,000, the exact estimate. Without this transient army of labour, the plans of Macadam, Brunel or Telfer would have been worthless. Wages were 2 and 6 a day, and when you got the mix of money and drink, trouble was inevitable. The navvies were notorious for the trouble that followed them. The papers reported an incident they called the Battle of Broxburn, which involved 150 men on each side, armed with pick handles. After canal construction, the navvies went on to build the railways, and after that, the roads. Britain owes an immense debt to these migrant labourers. Let's have a last look at Kirkwoods map. If you look at the bottom right hand corner, you see the rope works. This was Samuel Gilmore's business. He had a rope wholesalers in the Grass Market. He gave his name to Gilmore Place. If you follow Fountain Bridge, you will notice it is being built up. Before this, Fountain Bridge was known as Foley Bridge because of the condition of the Lochran burn, which crossed Fountain Bridge. It was an open sewer. Notice the original well across from the grove. After the Union of 1707, we were enrolled in the British tax system. A tax system requires bureaucrats, and these were imported from England. These people needed houses, and they wouldn't be safe living in the old town, as the natives were still aggrieved at the sellout. Fountain Bridge proved to be the ideal answer to the problem. It was outside the town, and plots could be bought large enough to build a house and a stable and still have a large garden. They were mostly gentry in charge of the customs and excise. Many are buried at St Cuthbert's churchyard. These incomers also required tailors and hairdressers, dressmakers, servants, etc. In short, Fountain Bridge was an English enclave prior to the building of the Union Canal. The canal in the 50s. Johnson had a painting of the Loch Ness Monster on the boathouse wall. The boys in the rowing boats weren't allowed to go beyond the bridge. Johnson's boat shed. You could hire a rowing boat for £10 an hour. In the 1930s, Mr. Johnson used to run trips to Ratho on Sundays and holidays. It was popular with the locals as it was cheap. An old man told me they had a pet monkey on board. This is a photograph of my old man, Daido Brown, around 1960. His job was to maintain the canal, clear weeds, repair the bank, a job which had been necessary since 1822, 140 years. When he died in 1962, he was effectively the last bargee until the recent developments.
We've just come down Mill Lane to where Dundee Street takes over from Fountain Bridge, and there ahead is the end of our heritage trail. But just to our right, and back in time, once stood Fountain House. Fountain House here was a mansion inside the large Dalry estate, which belonged to the noble families of Cheesley and then the Brands. Its centre of power was Dalry House. It's still there today. And these ornamental gates of Fountain House was the south entrance to that estate of Dalry. Now, continuing along Dundee Street, ahead there, the Fountain Bridge Public Library, serving the west side of the city from the 1930s, when it was built. It's just at the bottom of Murdoch Terrace, like the pub across from it, called the Fountain Well. But once it was called Rutherford's. Then the Dundee Arms was a real Jambo pub in those days, packed on Saturdays with Heart supporters before and after the match at Tynecastle. But the Fountain Bridge Library had its fans too. Here is a 1955 photograph, reading material there to suit all age groups, and it kept up with the times. Today, it's a fully equipped modern library with all the modern facilities, computers, etc., etc. And our pub again, but inside this time, looking out at the popular Bustle and Bucky woman. She represents a tradition that goes back to the 18th century or before that. The fishwives of New Haven and Musselburgh, Fisher Row, hardy women they were. And they were still around the city, at least in the 1950s. Few busy pubs didn't have one outside their doors on a Saturday. A quick glance up Murdoch Terrace. There's a milkman doing his rounds, just like Sean Connery used to do. And up there, the ever-popular Steamy, the Murdoch Terrace Public Washhouse. A local campaign failed to stop its closure. And now at the end of our trail, and we look back, past the Fountain Bridge Park, to Edinburgh's famous landmark, its castle, towering above the Grass Market, where we began our local history tour of the Westport, Tollcross and Fountain Bridge. A close-up now of our castle, painted in dramatic style by George Brown, and in the moonlight too. Quite romantic, except for the midnight prowler there. And a view from the centuries-old Greyfriars Kirkyard. But perhaps the most important feature in this painting is that great rock there, over 350 million years old, the remains of an extinct volcano. Just think, if our early Celtic or Pictish settlers had not found that rock and found it an ideal place to build a fort on, how could their settlement below it have grown to become our city of Edinburgh?
We're the first ones to starve, we're the first ones to die, we're the first ones in line for that pie in the sky, and we're always the last when the cream is shared out. For the worker is working when the fat cat's about, aye, and all of these things the worker has done, from tilling the fields to carrying the gun. We've been yoked to the plough since time first began, aye, and always expected to carry the can.